During the tax season, everybody's rushing to file their tax returns, be done, get a refund, and just forget about it until the next tax season. Well, unfortunately, not everybody understands that the tax return is not just a form that reports some of your financial information to the taxing authority. The tax return is something more. It's actually a legal document that you sign under penalty of perjury and that can be used as evidence against you in the court. I will walk you today through 4 things that you may not have heard before about the tax return, but hopefully actually will make you to slow down before you hit that file button and filing the tax return. I'm Olena. I'm tax attorney practicing in the United States, and I'm a founder of law firm Ruth Tax Law. I help my clients with the tax authorities collection and audits, and I created this channel to help the taxpayers to understand in simple way the quite complicated U.S. tax system. A tax return is a binding legal document that you sign under penalty of perjury. And I'm not sure how many taxpayers actually notice, but that every tax return has this tiny font in the box where you sign the tax return, which states that you sign the tax return under penalty of perjury, and you declare that you reviewed, examined the tax return, and to the best of your knowledge, all the information on the reported on the tax return is true, accurate, and complete. It does not matter whether you file the tax return on paper or you e-file it. So just by putting the signature on it and then filing the tax return actually becomes an official declaration of your income, deduction, credits, their tax, but also of your financial situation. Therefore, I always tell my clients that do not rush with filing the tax return. Before you file it, you actually should examine it, look at it, making sure that you understand every number, making sure that you ask your tax return preparation the questions with respect to items that you are not sure about, and only then sign it and send it. So I hope this information will change the way how you treat the tax season, makes you slow down and make you file the tax return before you understand it. Your tax return is a binding legal document not only for purposes of the reporting to tax authorities, but also in other areas. Giving you an example, your tax returns can be used in mortgage application to determine your income or confirm it, business loan applications, and even in immigration matters. Moreover, the courts can use their tax returns as evidence in court proceeding, including in the bankruptcies and also determination of your ability to pay your financial situation. I'll give you one example. There was a proceeding in a bankruptcy court in 2025. The debtor claimed that one of your loans is dischargeable because it is a personal loan. Creditor stepped in and disagreed, and the argument was first that the proceeds of that loan were actually to pay the debtor's the tuition. And also creditor brought in the tax returns and the information reported by the debtor on the tax returns as their credit for education. The bankruptcy court accepted the tax returns as evidence and determines that since their proceeds were used for the tuition, the debtor reported that loan as a student loan, and the tax returns were as an evidence, then the bankruptcy court actually determined that it was not dischargeable, and as a result, the debtor stayed with that loan not discharged. So this is one of the examples that you need to make sure that you represent the information on your tax return accurately, because otherwise it can be used in other places. But it's not only about accuracy, it's actually about inconsistency. And this proceeding in the bankruptcy court is one of the examples, because their debtor actually treated their loan as a student loan for purposes of that tax reporting, but at the same time as a personal loan for bankruptcy purposes. So that was exactly inconsistencies. And if you submit your information in other places, any financial disclosures, make sure that those inconsistencies do not exist, because they can be used against you. And one of the other examples I will give you is when tax authorities actually can use these inconsistencies on your tax return against you in the audits or collection. For instance, the IRS can request a copy of your business loan to compare the information reported to the banks, meaning outside of tax authority, and to the information reported on a tax return to tax authorities. So make sure that your tax return is accurate and also consistent with other financial disclosures. You cannot transfer your liability with respect to the tax return to somebody else. There is a common misconception that if you used the tax professional who helped you to prepare the tax return, you can actually transfer the liability to that professional for any type of errors on the tax returns or late filing. I have quite often potential clients calling me in and asking whether they can sue their accountants for late filed tax return or for the refusal of filing the tax return during the last days of the tax season, or for any errors. The tax return has to exercise the due diligence, but you are the one who ultimately liable for the accuracy of tax return, for timeliness of tax return, and of course for the payment of tax. And the courts actually repeatedly stated that the taxpayers cannot hide behind the tax professionals with respect to their liability simply by blaming a preparer. Moreover, remember, the tax return preparer can, first of all, show that they exercised due diligence, that you did not provide the complete information to prepare an accurate tax return, and that you actually reviewed the tax return before signing it. And by signing it, you agreed that you didn't have any questions. So remember that you are the one who is liable for your tax return, even if you may have found some of their errors on their tax return preparer site. The last thing for today is defensibility of your tax return depends on the documentation that you have. So you can have the tax return that you clearly understand, you know all the numbers on it, you are pretty sure that it's all accurate. However, defensibility of the tax return depends on the documentation that you have to support every number on your tax return. And in order to satisfy the burden of proof required by the IRS, you actually have to have the documents if there is an audit or any question from the IRS. Therefore, if you do not have the documentation, or it's incomplete or unorganized, then you may have additional tax penalties and interest for not being able to support the numbers on your tax return. Again, even though those numbers are accurate. Therefore, my point is that the tax season does not end just with the filing the tax return. It extends to you preparing all the documentation and being ready for any potential audit. And my recommendation would be put all the documentation separately. For instance, personal should be separate from business. Make sure that the documents are categorized in separate folders depending on the expenses or income that you report on a tax return. I would highly recommend digitalize their records because the paper fades away. And I had that issue with some of my clients when we couldn't prove some of their expenses just because their paper, the receipts, they faded away. And if you have all these documents, you know that you will be prepared if there's an audit or questioning from the IRS. And by the way, IRS or any other tax authority. And by the way, IRS can audit you within 3 or 6 years. So that's there is a different term as well. If that's fraudulent, there is no statute of limitation. But I would keep this in mind. So again, defensibility of your tax return depends on the documentation. So I gave you all this information not to scare you, not at all. I don't want to create any fear. However, you should use this information to be prepared and to understand that the tax season is not only about filing tax return, but it actually has a long-term policy for you. So you need not only ensure slowdown and ensure that all the numbers on the tax return are accurate. You also need to make sure that you prepare all the documentation for any potential audit. And you need to ensure that you are consistent with your information reported on a tax return and information reported on other financial disclosures. Because remember, the tax return is not just a form, it's actually a binding legal document that you sign under penalty of perjury and that the court or other parties can use actually against you, not necessarily or as some type of evidence. Thus, I hope this information is helpful, and if so, please put some likes, and we will continue with other videos. First, I will explain how to treat the tax return as a binding legal document, and also we'll discuss how to preserve the documentation to make sure that you are ready for potential audit or escape actually red flags on your tax return that due in maybe a few days or several months. Olena was with you, and I will see you soon.